All right, what is up, and welcome back to the Build a Better You podcast. I'm your host, Austin Chan, and today we are going to be covering the topic of how to transition out of a deficit or a fat loss phase into more of a maintenance or even a surplus or muscle building phase, if you will. I've had a number of requests from people through DMs, through email, asking me this question. So I figured I'd just make a podcast on this, although I have gotten back to them. I figured I'd make a podcast on this because if I had a number of people reach out to me like through private messages and all that, then I figured this is a topic that I should cover in more detail and put it out into my podcast so that I can give a more in-depth answer rather than just trying to answer it through a quick DM or a short email. I can cover this in more depth and in more breadth. And cover all the specific little points that I like to touch upon as well. And as you know, I do like to ramble on about all things fitness. So that's definitely a plus here if you're listening to me on this podcast. But yeah, without further ado, we'll get into it. But first, I do have a quick little announcement for the month of October. I am taking on new online coaching clients. So if you need extra help and accountability to lose fat, to build muscle, and to build a healthier relationship with food, go ahead and click the link in the show notes. I'll leave a link to my online coaching, the landing page on my website. So go ahead and check that out if you do want extra help, accountability to change your life, change your body. And if you want to personally work with me, then there's that too. So yeah, that's about it. So without further ado, we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast. So firstly, how do we transition from a deficit to a maintenance? And firstly, we have to establish some expectations here. Firstly, when you transition from a deficit to maintenance, you are going to gain weight. And before you freak out, before you go, oh man, I'm not going to transfer it because I'm so scared of gaining weight, I'm so scared of getting fat, which I totally understand, because if you have been through a successful fat loss phase, you've likely lost a significant amount of weight and fat. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It can be very nerve-wracking to start gaining weight and feel like you've reset your progress and feel like you're going to lose all your progress, especially after you've been super consistent, super patient, and worked so hard to lose that initial weight. It can be very daunting and frightening to see the scale go back up and you're like, oh no, what if this turned into a slippery slope and then I just gain all my weight back? First off, this is not going to happen unless you let it happen. So if you really think about it, the amount of time it took you to lose the weight was likely a very long time. It probably took months and years on end to even lose that weight and especially to be able to sustainably keep it off was very difficult. The process it took to get there was very difficult. Therefore, if you have that kind of same approach and mindset to gaining weight or even maintaining weight, you're going to have a very hard time. It's going to take a lot of consistency and patience and hard work to reverse that progress, if you really think about it. Like if you just lost all that weight, and this is what a lot of people end up doing actually when they do crash diets, a lot of people who don't take the consistent, patient, and hard work approach, they'll lose all that weight all of a sudden or very fast, and then immediately after that, they'll gain all that weight back because they didn't take the time to learn the habits of being consistent, being patient, of actually teaching themselves a more sustainable way to approach dieting and losing fat and being in a deficit. They didn't take that lifestyle, long-term, consistent approach. Therefore, they didn't use that same process to keep the weight off. So therefore, that's why they gained all that weight back, because they didn't teach themselves the habits. So they went immediately back to their old habits, and lo and behold, they gained all that weight back because they haven't taught themselves a single thing, and they don't have a sustainable plan to keep going. But if you are in this boat, which I'm sure you are, if you are following my content, or if you have been following my content, or if you've just been listening to a lot of the type of information that I put out there, as well as a lot of reputable coaches, we preach very similar things in that sense of finding a sustainable plan that you can stay consistent with. Then you do not have anything to be afraid of in terms of losing all your progress or reversing all your progress. Because if you have taught yourself these sustainable habits, really, you just need to follow the same exact plan and slowly add a little bit more food into your diet so that you come out of that deficit and into a more manageable calorie range, so that you can maintain your current weight and you don't perpetually stay in the deficit and then your body eventually wastes away, which is what we don't want. So first rule of thumb when transitioning from a deficit to maintenance is going slow and steady. And just like how you lose weight, how you gain weight, you want to do it slow and steadily. You don't want to just suddenly add back 1,000 calories and gain a shit ton of weight and then reverse all your progress. You can go slow and steady. And the funny thing is about this is that if you've heard of metabolic adaptation, it actually works both ways. So as you cut calories, your body is like, oh shit, we're not getting as many calories coming in, so we're gonna adapt our metabolism to try and burn less calories, usually through the reduction of NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically stuff like, walking, fidgeting, stuff that burns calories that through like movement and fidgeting, but doesn't necessarily account as normal exercise. Whereas like if you have like a planned gym session where you go and do cardio, or you have a planned gym session where you go and actually lift the weights, that doesn't count as NEAT. NEAT is all the little things you do throughout the day, whether you are conscious of it or unconscious of it, that can actually burn a significant amount of calories. I believe I talked about this in my Is Your Metabolism Slow podcast. So if you want to know more information on that, go ahead and listen to that podcast. You can do that. You can pause it right here and go to that one, or you can listen to that one right after. But yeah, that's going to be a very comprehensive podcast describing basically how your metabolism works and do you really have a slow metabolism, and a lot of things I hear about metabolism and kind of the truth on that, a lot of myth busting and just really addressing any metabolic like issues that a lot of people face. Not to say that I am a metabolic specialist, but it's just a lot of the things I hear on a day-to-day basis working as a fitness coach. So yeah, but yeah, slow and steady because of metabolic adaptation. And the funny thing is it does work both ways. So as you cut calories, your body tries to adapt by conserving more energy because it's in an energy deficit state. So it's going to try to account for that, but it's not as drastic as people make it. It's like a small percentage of like the amount of calories you cut. So let's say you are at maintenance and you cut 500 calories from your maintenance, and so that puts you into a deficit. Maybe metabolic adaptation occurs and conserves like 100 calories. So, but still, you're at the end of the day, you're still at a 400 calorie deficit, which is still going to elicit weight loss and fat loss in the end if you stick to it long enough. And also on the other side of things, when you increase calories, your body actually metabolically adapts too. And this is something a lot of people don't talk about. I don't know why, probably because it doesn't sell as much stuff. But when you increase calories by, let's say, like a few hundred to like maybe in maintenance or even a surplus, when you increase calories, your body gets a little bit more energy. That's why you feel, I don't know if you've tried this before, but that's why you feel a little bit more energetic and you feel like you can move around and fidget a lot more when you have an increased amount of calories. Obviously, this doesn't like perpetually happen. So like if you increase your calories by like 1,000 every single day, you're not going to be so active to the point where you're just burning thousands and thousands of calories. And eventually it's going to spill over into fat, into a surplus if you do it way too much. So do it slow and steady, and your metabolism will eventually like catch up, and you'll kind of find the point where like your metabolism isn't going to like forever go up and adapt because you're increasing calories. But also do not be afraid to increase calories in that sense. And as a matter of fact, I do have a general recommendation for people. When you want to increase calories, increase your calories by 10% of what your current intake is at a time. And for a lot of people, this works out from anywhere to 100 to 300. Unless you're eating like over 4,000 calories a day, then that's going to be like 400. But for most people, a lot of people are eating within that 1,000 to 3,000 calorie range. That's just how the numbers work out. But yeah, increase your calories 10% at a time, which works out to 100 to 300. And you don't really have to worry about like excess fat gain in this range because that's like barely anything. Like if you ever heard about the general rule that like a pound of fat is about 3,500 calories over your maintenance. So this is like over the course of, let's see if I can do the math right. It's over the course of like a little over a week. So like not even over a week, like 2 weeks. Yeah, over the course of 2 weeks, if you put yourself into that like surplus state, and that's assuming that you're eating 300 something calories over maintenance, and that's not even factoring metabolic adaptation. So do not be afraid to add calories, and you'll most likely find that you can increase calories a significant amount before you kind of find that set point for your maintenance. And now on to the next point about the macro breakdown. So what should you increase your calories from? And generally, I recommend increasing it from both carbs and fats. Your protein should generally stay the same just for muscle building, muscle maintenance purposes, and overall satiation. Like, again, the same habits that allowed you to lose the weight are the same habits that you should keep in place that are going to help you maintain that weight, which is why I preach so much about finding a sustainable plan that you can stick to for the long term, because these same habits that you used to lose the weight are going to be the same habits that you're going to be using to maintain that weight. And this is why crash dieting does not work, because those same so-called habits that you do from crash dieting of eating 1,200 calories or starving yourself on like a protein shake only diet, or just eating like a very obscene little amount of food like a can of tuna, like think about it, you cannot sustain that for a very long time. And so what happens when people can't sustain it? They eventually get to a breaking point, because I don't think anyone can stick to that diet forever. Eventually they'll get to a sticking point, and then next thing you know, they'll binge on every single thing in sight, all the stuff they've been restricting themselves from, and this eventually puts them into a calorie surplus, and like all these so-called progress that they've made, they just lose it all, and they just reset everything because they haven't built those habits into place. Whereas if you had a sustainable plan to start from, and you're like steadily losing the weight, then you're like, okay, I can keep this up probably for the rest of my life. And then you just need at that point, you have everything in place, but all you need to do is really focus on your calories, your calorie amount. And that's basically just adding or taking away more or less of the same food. And so, let's see, what did I freaking go on a tangent off from? Oh yeah, so keeping your protein the same. So yeah, keeping protein the same. And also protein, as you know, I've said time and time again, protein is very filling. It's virtually impossible to store as fat because it has to be converted to glucose through gluconeogenesis, if you're into all that science, in order to be converted to glucose, and glucose is storable as fat. But this is also a very expensive energy process, so your body doesn't like to do that. So it's not going to store protein as fat because it's just wasting so much energy to do so, that it's much rather store carbs and fats as like body fat. So that's a few reasons to keep protein high. If you do want to get into the nitty gritty of it, mainly increase your calories from carbs, although this is going to be hard, just simply because, you know, carbs, like a lot of people say that carbs aren't filling, but I think like certain carbs are very filling, especially if you are doing this whole like calorie deficit and calorie maintenance and all that, right? Carbs are very filling, and when you're increasing in like these slow amounts, you're not going to be able to like eat all that much, especially if you're choosing very like high volume and like low calorie dense foods. It's just simply hard to do, and this is honestly the unpopular truth. So yeah, I would say mainly increase your calories from carbs if you can, just simply because the deficit recommendations that I recommend for a lot of people is keeping your protein very high. This generally works out to 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So when you're keeping protein as that constant, fat you should also keep at a constant, because your body needs a certain amount of fat to maintain for optimal hormonal function and just overall bodily, health and function. So when your protein and fat are relatively constant, then carbs is probably the only thing you should be manipulating in terms of increasing or decreasing calorie intake. So when you're in a maintenance or surplus phase, just increase your calories mainly from carbs. If you find that you have to drastically increase your calories, like maybe you're increasing your calories anywhere from 500 to 1,000 because you just have a fast metabolism that it just keeps ramping up because you're increasing your calories, then I would consider adding some fats because fat is very energy dense. It contains 9 calories per gram. So in that's the only case where I recommend increasing fats. But I mean, other than that, also if you like fats in your diet, then nothing against that as well. Like, you're not gonna magically store a shit ton of body fat just because you're increasing your fats by a little bit. Again, it all comes down to calories in, calories out. And then the distribution wise, like, it's totally all up to you. As long as you hit those calories and protein requirements, carbs and fats can be whatever you want them to be. And although I do recommend, like, generally for most people, if you want overall like athletic performance, it's ideal to be getting a good amount of carbs, especially for a lot of people who follow me. If you're into like a lot of exercising and weightlifting, carbs are your friend in terms of muscle building and also in terms of just providing a steady and reliable energy source for your body, because carbs really help with like high performance sports, which is why you see athletes on the regular eat like literally like 300 to 500 grams of carbs every single day because they just need to fuel their workouts. And carbs are literally the most efficient energy source for your body. So when you hear all these people talk like all these carbophobes telling you to stay away from carbs because they're making you fat, that's simply untrue. It's literally comes down to calories in, calories out, and carbs are actually your friend whether you are in a surplus or deficit. Like, carbs also has a kind of like protein sparing effect. So when you eat more carbs, you actually need a little bit less protein, especially in a surplus state, which we'll get into a little bit. But yeah, for general recommendations, I recommend keeping your protein very constant, keeping your fat constant, and then increasing carbs or decreasing carbs, depending on what your goals are, depending if you want to get into a deficit or a maintenance or a surplus. But yeah, that's my general recommendations. If you do need to increase calories drastically, then I would consider adding more fats just because it's a bit more energy dense macronutrient. So now in terms of your training program, I know there's a lot of discussion around this, like not even discussion. I'd say just like your basic influencer, they'll talk about like having bulk or cut routines or having, muscle building and fat loss routines. And that honestly is a bunch of bullshit. There's no such thing as a muscle building and a fat loss routine. Like, especially in the realm of strength training, your strength training routine should not change all that much, regardless of whether you are in a bulking phase on trying to put on maximal muscle, or in an energy deficit or a fat loss phase where you're trying to lose fat and retain as much muscle as possible. Your routine should not change, because the simple fact is the program that helped you build that muscle is going to be the same program that's going to help you maintain that muscle, if you really think about it. And in fact, I mean, the only thing I think you should change in terms of being in a deficit, maintenance, or surplus is just the training volume. So just adjusting like how many effective reps you're getting. So let's say you are trying to build as much muscle as possible. Obviously, because you're doing this, you want to be optimizing your training so that it stimulates your body to build as much muscle as possible. And when you generally do this, a lot of people like to talk about volume. But I mean, even though that's not the main driver of muscle growth, volume can serve as kind of like a booster or a little extra variable that you can manipulate to increase like the amount of muscle you're building. But it's only effective up to a certain point, which I won't get into. So you don't really want to get too much volume or too little volume. It's, in terms of volume, it's kind of like this inverse U shape. So optimal volume is kind of at that like bell curve, that middle. And then if you do too much volume, obviously your body's not going to be able to recover and you're going to see less gains. And if you do too little, then your body's not going to get enough stimulus in order to stimulate your body to build muscle. So it's having enough volume is just kind of that sweet spot. So generally, I recommend, your training program, if you're eating more, then obviously you can push yourself a little bit harder in terms of having like, you're probably going to be able to progressive overload a lot easier and also be able to handle a little bit more of those hard reps. So I would say if you're in a maintenance or surplus phase, then then I would implement more like hard sets into your routine, because you're just able to handle more volume. And that's kind of the time where, like, when you're feeling your body enough, that's the time you should be really pushing your body to its limits and really forcing it to adapt and build muscle and build strength. Whereas when you're in a fat loss routine, because you're in an energy deficit state, you're not going to be building all that much muscle. And like I said before in previous podcasts, you can build muscle and lose fat at the same time. However, it's not optimal it's not optimal at all. In fact, the only situations where you can do that, to a significant degree at least, like, is if you're relatively new to training, and if you're coming back after a long layoff, or if you're extremely overweight, because muscle building takes a lot of energy. And unless you just have like a lot of fat on your body, which your body can use as energy to dedicate towards the muscle building process, then it's definitely not optimal. And I would recommend eating at least at maintenance and even a slight surplus in order to maximize muscle growth. Now, with that being said, there has been some research to show that you can build muscle and lose fat at the same time, so to a significant degree, but this is going to be a very small percentage of the population, and it's not going to apply to everyone. So I would take my chances and just eat a little bit more. And like I said, you're going to feel so much better. And a lot of the reasons why people are afraid of eating more is because they're afraid of putting on a little bit extra body fat. And if you want to maximize muscle, you're going to have to get over this fear. And I know it's not going to be easy. You're not going to do it overnight, but it's just simply the fact that you have to be in an energy surplus state if you want to maximize muscle growth. Now, that being said, if you don't want to maximize muscle growth, and if you just want to maintain what you're currently doing, that's totally fine. You don't have to push yourself as hard. You don't have to increase calories as much. But transitioning from a deficit to maintenance, you're just going to have to increase calories to the point where your body just kind of levels off, in a sense. So in a sense of tracking and making sure that you are maintaining and not like just putting on a lot of body fat over time. And again, this process is going to be slow, so you can track your progress, and also realizing that you can always dial back at any time. It's a very eye-opening experience, because once you realize that, like, your body's not going to just put on a bunch of fat or lose a bunch of fat just because you're doing one simple thing. It's a process that really takes a lot of intense consistency and patience and like actual hard work. Then you'll realize, like, man, I'm actually in full control of my diet, my training, and my body composition. And it's a very eye-opening experience, because a lot of people think like, oh, if I just like eat whatever I want, I'm just gonna go off the rails all of a sudden. It's like, no, if you went off the rails, it would actually take like at least a month for you to see like very visible changes. And this is because a lot of people who go through these they weren't aware during that time of a lot of their overeating, or a lot of when their poor habits were forming. And so they just weren't aware of it for months on end, and suddenly they felt like it was suddenly they gained a ton of weight. Whereas now, especially if you built these healthy habits into place, built this awareness into place, you're gonna have full control over it, and you can always dial back. Like, if you are actually putting on too much body fat over the course of a few months, then you can actually dial it back. It's never too late to cut calories, but you have to get out of that mindset immediately at first, and not be scared to put on extra body fat, because you can always diet it back down, but putting it on is just as hard. So realizing that and just increasing your calories and really finding that maintenance range. Now, in terms of a maintenance range, like I said, I do like to use a range rather than a strict number, just because after having been in a deficit, I'm sure you know that your weight fluctuates a lot every single day. So you can't expect your weight to be maintained at the same weight every single day. That's just simply unrealistic. And your weight's going to fluctuate for a multitude of reasons, just simply due to fluctuation of water from things like, your hormones, having your menstrual cycle every month, eating more salt and more carbs than usual, having a really heavy workout, so your muscles just inflamed and they soak up more water. So your weight can fluctuate a lot on a day-to-day basis. So in terms of tracking, I would recommend still taking measurements. And measurements take a while to change too. So, if your measurements are going up over time, then it's like, okay, you can be sure that you're gaining fat. I mean, unless you're in a muscle building phase, then obviously you want your body to be getting bigger. But and that tracking measurements in place, taking progress pictures, that's also a very good metric because even though your weight can change on a day-to-day basis, your progress pictures really show like, how lean you are, whether you are putting on body fat, putting on muscle in certain places, and you can really see like, and especially if you are really focused on building muscle, you can start to see the definition come through. Yeah, so that's what I recommend in terms of tracking. And in terms of a weight, I would still use weight. I wouldn't say ditch the scale altogether if that's something you do want to use to manage your current progress or your maintenance. Using the scale and then giving yourself a range. So again, rather than having a certain number, which is super unrealistic, give yourself a range. I like to give myself a range of 10 pounds. So let's say, the weight I want to maintain, my body weight right now is like, 170. Although I am focusing on like a mass gaining phase. So I'm letting my weight go up, but not going up too much. So for me, let's say if I wanted to maintain, my current weight is 170. So let's say if I wanted to maintain my current weight at 170 pounds, I would give myself a range from that midpoint. So I would be at 170 and I'd give myself a 5-pound difference on either side. So 165 is probably like the lightest I would go. Then I'd be like, okay, I'm probably losing too much. I don't want to be losing. I'd increase my calories. If it's starting to trend towards that 175, then maybe I'm like, okay, maybe I gotta dial things back. But yeah, giving yourself that 10-pound range, because your body weight can literally fluctuate like 10 pounds just on a normal basis and just through maintenance. So definitely realizing that you need to give yourself grace and really give yourself room for your body to fluctuate is also very good in terms of like flexibility and sustainability and all that, because again, it's totally unrealistic to expect your body to stick with a certain number, and simply tying yourself to that number, again, like it makes you do some stupid shit. Because if you are just solely focused on keeping your body weight at a certain number, maybe you won't and you see your weight go up after like going out for a meal with some friends, and like what are you going to do? Like you gain weight and it's like, what are you going to do? You're not going to go out with friends? It's like, no, that's super unrealistic. And again, we want to be building a sustainable lifestyle that you can stay consistent with, that you can use for the rest of your life and really manipulate to however you want your goals to be. And it all starts with having that flexibility, giving yourself like some grace, letting yourself enjoy the moments in life. And that's really what it's all about. Like you could be super restrictive, but it's like, what's the point? It's like, why would you want to be more restrictive when you don't need to be, and you can actually enjoy your life? And because life is not all about dieting and just really focusing on fitness, I really think that fitness should enhance your life. It shouldn't take away anything from your life. But yeah, that's my point of view. I mean, some people will literally die to improve their performance or get leaner or build more muscle, but that's not me. I mean, although those are definitely on my plate, on my goals right now, like I don't feel like it's like a do or die thing for me. I would much rather have more balance while not achieving my goals 100% than achieve my goals 100% and not enjoying life at all, because I think life is way too short to be just focusing on one thing. Life is about the overall experience of having a balance with everything. But yeah, that was a nice little motivational spiel, I guess, for me. But yeah, if you do want to transition into a surplus, definitely the same thing. Just focus on adding a little bit more calories and really focusing on a slower rate of weight gain. For a lot of people, so this is definitely going to depend on your experience, what your training experience. So firstly, if you are only in like your first 3 years of lifting, you definitely have a lot of progress to make. And so I would recommend, in that case, your rate of weight gain should be the same as like the general recommendation for weight loss, which is 0.5 to 1% of your current body weight. So whatever your current body weight is, take 0.5 to 1% of that, and then that should kind of be a good range to gain. So I would say especially when you're first like starting out with lifting, you can gain a ton of muscle in that like first 3 years. So I would recommend anywhere from half a pound to 1 pound a week, which is like a safe rate of weight gain. And this is going to include like all the water weight, all the glycogen and everything. And then as you kind of get through that first year, it's going to slow down. I would say, cut the rate in half after that first year. And like as the years go by, obviously it's going to be slower and slower. Like for me right now, like I would say my rate of weight gain that I'm expecting is maybe 1 pound a month. And so so obviously for me, like that means that I don't have to be in a ton of a calorie surplus because I'm not gaining like that much weight. I don't need that much of a surplus in order for my body to synthesize that much muscle. So I'm just focusing on eating around maintenance, and really it's more of like a loose maintenance because, I know that some days I'm going to be a bit more, like more often than not, I think with my nutrition, with everyone's nutrition, we're going to be a bit more looser than we think we are. We're never like always super dialed in. And especially as you do it longer and longer, you don't want to be super dialed in. Like it's just not fun to be staring down your calories and protein like every single day. Like as you get more used to it, you just kind of have an idea of where you are at, and you don't really want to stay like really dialed in because you've been doing it for so long. You just like there are things that just matter so much more than just like watching every single calorie and macro. So yeah, so for me, that's why I like to stick around maintenance. I stick around like a loose maintenance. Like I know that I can go out, I'll enjoy myself. I can, I'll eat those high calorie foods, and I know that as long as I stay pretty consistent with like the meals that I do have and prepare at home, I can stay relatively consistent, and then I'll know I have all these like flexible times and dates where I go out with friends, and just have a good time and just eat whatever I want, that this will be like enough of a so-called surplus for me in order to build muscle and all that. So yeah, that about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. I did cover everything I wanted to cover, but yeah, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a 5-star review if this has helped you. Definitely helps I guess it helps the algorithm. That's what I've heard with the podcast and all that. So yeah, leave a 5-star review if this has helped you. Be sure to leave a written review if you do want to let me know what has specifically helped you. I do make sure to read like all the reviews and all the comments and stuff. I do post on YouTube, post on the podcast and all that. And just as a reminder, I am taking on new online coaching clients for the month of October. So if you need extra help and accountability to lose fat, build muscle, and improve your relationship with food, be sure to click the link in the show notes to apply. Look forward to talking to you. But yeah, that about wraps it up. So I will catch you in the next one. Peace.